5-foot wave, and that was a pretty big wave. And this wave that hit them was 45 feet, so that it made a mockery of their assumptions. I've looked at 3 big accidents in nuclear now, and 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and now Fukushima. And all of them had occurred for reasons that nobody anticipated. And so that tells me that it's not about, analysis is not going to make this problem any better, because you can only analyze things that you anticipate. And yet all of the things that have hit us in the nuclear industry have not been anticipated. I think that really speaks to Donald Rumsfeld and his unknown unknowns. And there are too many unknown unknowns here that can easily screw up the calculations and cause another accident.
But don't you think also that, aside from the unknown unknowns, that there are certain knowns, the assumptions were very low in terms of the criteria, not having containment that was seismically fit. There are some things that you don't have to be at the highest echelon of nuclear knowledge to know are not set up appropriate for the kind of potential dangers that these plants have. And
you're absolutely right.
There's unknown unknowns, which is kind of like an X factor scenario, but there's maybe not a 10-foot wave or a 20-foot wave, but there's a 100-foot wave. So the bottom line is that you go way higher, 10 times higher than you think. That would seem to be real prudence in operating these plants, to me.
There are people outside of the agency, whether it's here in the States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the people it's regulating. They work inside a box. And then there's people like Dave Lochbaum at Union Concerned Scientists and I who ask just those kinds of questions. You're not looking at the real problem. And in Japan, there were scientists who said, this 25-foot wave that you've analyzed for is way too small. And the regulators and TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric, said you're wrong. And they had the power. So the wisdom was on the one side of the equation, but the power and the money was on the other side of the equation. We see that here in the States, too. I've been arguing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission since 2005 on it's not obscure. It has to do with containment failures. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has written there is a 0 probability of a containment failure.
Well, that's crazy. That's just pathology.
Well, yes, that's the assumption that I am going up against. And there will never be an accident if there's a 0 probability. And what I've been saying is there is a finite probability that a containment can fail. And now, of course, Fukushima, all 3 of those containments are leaking. So that I have been proven right by events, but yet the Nuclear Regulatory Commission still hasn't changed its assumptions.
On Russia Today, when you were interviewed, you said that you had felt that TEPCO was 3 weeks too late, that the Japanese are committed to nuclear, and they wanted to downplay what was happening. And the standard practice was to look for the best alternative versus the realistic one. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Talk about that. That was very insightful. Talk about that.
Well, let's look at this earthquake. The tsunami wall. They could have built a 15-meter wall, but it would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And they, in their calculus, not in my calculus, but in their calculus, the hundreds of millions of dollars come out of profits, and the risk, as they see it, is incredibly low. And so if you
it's just really gambling.
You're absolutely right, and those gambles are here in the United States as well. It's not like the Americans are perfect and the Japanese.
Right. No, I totally understand.
So let's go back to the tsunami wall, and it could have been 15 meters is 45 feet high, and that's what the renegade scientists in Japan thought it should be. But in order to do that, it would have cost money, it would have taken time, and neither of which did the captured regulator and the person who had to spend the money feel that that should be spent. And they use this thing called PRA, probabilistic risk assessment, and it's a numbers game. And if you downplay the risk and you increase the cost, you can always justify not making a safety improvement. And that's what happens in the U.S. industry, that you can essentially cook the books. You can push the numbers so the risk is incredibly low. And you can also adjust the numbers so the cost is incredibly high. And you say, well, for this risk, this cost doesn't make sense. And at the NRC, that is the way decisions are made. They compare our risk versus the nuclear industry's cost.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I was down there in the summer arguing about containment integrity in front of the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards. And that was exactly the point on the table, was containment integrity. And I had pictures of containments that failed. Here in the U.S., there's been, I guess maybe 10 in the last 40 years where there's been holes or cracks in containment. And still, the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards was saying there's zero probability of a failure. Now, and the reason they wanted that was because they were very close to licensing a brand new reactor, which was called the AP1000. And it's still being licensed. They have not slowed the licensing process down on the AP1000, which is a next-generation reactor. And they are so thoroughly committed to having it succeed that they were willing to ignore photographs and say, well, those photographs don't apply. The probability is zero.
It's a total disconnect. It's also sociopathic consciousness to me for this to happen.
I think that's why I try to stick to the facts, because if I get into the reality of it, that this is absolutely illogical,
Actually, in this way, I do disagree with you. I think it's totally logical. The people that are acting this way and asserting that there's zero risk, okay, have a disconnect with awareness. I don't think that this is an accident. This is the manifestation of a way of thinking and functioning. And basically, why I appreciate you explaining it is that many of us feel so outside of what's going on with the nuclear industry, with nuclear power plants, with how they work, what's happening, what's being leaked, where the dangers are. It's very difficult to be on the outside listening to obviously filtered news and information, not only on radio and television, but you really still have to also look and listen carefully when you're listening to the web, which, at least you have an opportunity to really share what you know and to share your experience and to bring us into what's happening. But it's hard, and many of us feel very powerless as to what to do. Can we talk a little bit about what radiation has spread to America and what your perspective is about it and what are our dangers right now? I mean, I know that you're not trying to scare everybody, but I think we have to be vigilant because we know we're getting filtered information, and the powers that be are not being upfront with us, including our EPA, by the way, who I've been unhappy with for a year and a half for other things, but now I'm really unhappy with the EPA and the FDA. So what's your take on it, Arnie?
Well, there's two thoughts. First off, I'd like to talk just for a second about this issue of what I call the nuclear priesthood. And,
okay.
And that's a term coined by a guy named Barry Commoner back in the 70s, I think. So I don't take credit for it. But it's really an orthodoxy with its own vocabulary that I think is designed to exclude the public from the process. There's so many words and concepts that are difficult to understand that sort of only the priests could read that Bible, and we need to trust them.
And by the way, it's the same in finance.
Right. And so I think that, when you have a public hearing and you talk to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they sit there and they tolerate you, but you only have 2 minutes. And then they go home and go back to business as usual. Literally, they'll keep a stop clock on every person who speaks. And I have come forward with major concerns, and they've given me 2 minutes. And so